My father, right in front of the lawyer, my sister, and everyone else in that damn room. Burned a $38 million check with my name on it. He believed the fire would wipe me out, that turning it to ash would make me disappear once more. But what he didn't realize was I wasn't there for the check. I came for the truth. My name is Harper Lane. I'm 34 years old, former military intelligence officer, and the daughter they tried to erase. And this is how I return. But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below so I know how far my story has reached. And if you're new here, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss another story like this one. Now, let me share how it all began. The conference room was silent, yet not with the quiet of sorrow. It was a hush that held weight, like a storm holding its breath before it breaks. You could feel its power, tight and controlled, the kind that makes your skin tingle. As if something precious is about to slip away and you won't even have a chance. To eject, I stepped inside and the air shifted as though the room itself was evaluating me. No one looked at me. No one spoke a word. It was as if the moment I walked through that door, I became a shadow in a place where my name shone brighter than anyone else's. Franklin Lane sat at the table's head, acting as if he owned the very concept of loss. To him, this wasn't just his father's will reading. This was another opportunity to take control, just as he always did. His fingers drummed on the table, slow and steady, as if counting down to something inevitable. My sister Vanessa sat to his right, draped in black silk, her smirk as sharp as ever, like a permanent part of her attire. She didn't even glance my way. I wasn't surprised. The last time we spoke, she'd told me, "You were always the crack in the family picture, Harper." I slid into the only empty chair far down at the table's end. It felt like they deliberately placed it there, wanting to keep me at arm's length even now, as if even after he was gone, they wanted to ensure I remained outside the family portrait. Miss Quinn, our family lawyer for as long as I could remember, gave me a small nod. She looked weary, as though carrying the weight of our family's secrets had finally begun to show. She adjusted her glasses and opened the folder before her. Diplomas, abstract paintings, and a faded photo of my grandfather shaking hands with the governor covered the walls. I could still hear his voice from that day, low and steady. "These men smile with their teeth, Harper. Always watch their eyes." I looked at Franklin's eyes now, cold as stone, flat as a frozen lake. Nothing in them but the certainty that he deserved everything. Miss Quinn began to read. "To Vanessa Lane, I leave the summer house in Vermont and the Steinway piano from the gallery room." Vanessa didn't even blink. You could tell she'd expected more. Her face was already calculating her next move, like a chess player unhappy with the board. She didn't bother to pretend gratitude, just sat there with that smirk, as if already planning to rewrite the will in her head. Miss Quinn continued to Franklin Lane. "I leave my collection of first edition Hemingway novels and a $10,000 donation to the American Integrity Foundation in his name." Franklin's breath caught, sharp and quick, as if he'd just bitten something bitter. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened and his hand gripped the armrest as if he were holding himself back. Then Miss Quinn turned the final page. "And to my granddaughter, Harper Lane, my only confidant, the one who never lied to me. Even when it would have been easier, I leave the rest of my estate, all financial holdings, real estate, and full voting. Control of Whitmore Dynamics effective immediately." The room froze. No one moved, not even me. Miss Quinn reached into her folder and slid a check across the table. $38 million. Signed, dated crisp as a new dollar bill. Before I could even process it, Franklin lunged forward and snatched the check. He stared at it as if it were a personal insult. Then, without a word, he pulled a lighter from his coat, flicked it on, and set the check ablaze. The flames caught fast, curling the edges, turning my name to ash. Vanessa gasped, Miss Quinn simply folded her hands and waited, calm as ever. Franklin let the check burn almost to nothing before dropping the ashes onto the polished table and locking eyes with me. "That's what you get for walking away," he said. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I didn't even breathe. I just smiled, because what he burned wasn't what he thought it was. Miss Quinn broke the silence. "Mr. Whitmore left this envelope for Harper. Was to be delivered only if today got complicated." She handed me a small sealed envelope marked private. I tucked it into my coat unopened. Vanessa finally spoke up, her voice sharp as a blade. "This is ridiculous. She hasn't been part of this family for years. She didn't visit, didn't call. It's just a name on a piece of paper." I looked at her, steady as a rock. "And yet, I'm the only name that mattered." Franklin slammed his fist on the table, making the water glasses rattle. "You abandoned us. You left. You chose the military over your own blood." I kept my voice calm. "I chose myself when none of you would." He pointed at me, his hand shaking with rage. "You think this money makes you one of us again? Do you think Dad's little gift changes who you are?" Vanessa jumped in, her words dripping with venom. "You were always the outsider. Even Mom said you didn't belong." I stood up. Not too fast, not too slow, just enough to shift the air in the room. "You can try to rewrite the past all you want, but you don't get to rewrite me." Franklin shot to his feet, his face red with fury. "You think this makes you powerful?" I met his gaze. "No, but it makes me free." Miss Quinn spoke again, her voice cutting through the tension. "If you wish to contest the will, you may do so through the courts. Today's proceeding is legally binding." Franklin stormed out, muttering about lawsuits. "Shh." Vanessa followed, hissing. "You'll regret showing up." I was alone in the room now. Miss Quinn handed me another file. "Your grandfather set up protections in case things got ugly. Review this when you're alone. He trusted you more than anyone." I nodded and slipped out through the back entrance. Outside, the wind bit at my skin, and the sky hung low and heavy. It felt like I'd just walked out of a battlefield, not a will reading. And in a way, I had. I didn't cry after leaving that will reading. I didn't scream or pick up the phone to call anyone. I just got in my car and drove. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly it felt like the only thing keeping me grounded. City lights blurred past, my pulse thumping in my ears. And Vanessa's words kept circling in my head like an unshakable song. "You were always the crack in the family picture." I hadn't thought about those words in years, but they hit me now, sharp and clear, like glass breaking in slow motion. That phrase had haunted me for decades. First whispered by aunts and uncles behind my back, then spat out by my father, like a curse, and finally carved in stone when they scrubbed my name from the Lane family trust. It happened when I was 17. It wasn't some dramatic scene, no yelling or slamming doors. It was cold, clinical, like they were severing a piece of the family they no longer wanted. I came home from school, my backpack still slung over one shoulder, and found them all at the dinner table. Franklin in his crisp suit, Vanessa with her, gleaming pearls, my mother staring at her plate, avoiding my eyes. My father didn't even ask me to sit down. He just looked at me and said, "From this moment, you're no longer part of this family." I stood there frozen, my voice barely a whisper. "What are you talking about? You chose to disobey us," he said. "You turned your back on our legacy. You picked the military over Yale." I looked at my mother, pleading, "Mom." She didn't look up, just sat there, silent. That silence was the sound of my childhood slipping away. They packed my things that night, 2 suitcases by the front door, as if I were something to be thrown out with the trash. Franklin carried them to the curb, his face blank. No arguments, no tears, just me, cut loose. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Grandpa Whitmore. "Come to the lake house," he said, his voice warm but firm. "I'll leave the gate open." He was the only one who ever stood up to my father in front of anyone. The Lane family cared about appearances more than anything. But Grandpa never bothered with their masks. When I arrived, he handed me a mug of hot cocoa and a wool blanket, the kind that smells like home. So, he said, sitting across from me, they made their choice. Now it's time for you to make yours. I don't have a choice, I told him, my voice small. Oh, you always have a choice, Harper. The hard part is living with what it costs. I stayed 2 nights. He didn't push me to talk or cry. He just gave me room to breathe. Before I left, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, when the time comes, you won't come back for revenge. You'll come back for clarity. And when you do, trust yourself to know what's worth fighting for. I've buried that memory for years, locked it away with the rest of my past. Until today, until Franklin lit that match and reminded me that being erased didn't mean I was gone. Back in my apartment, I sat on the floor, the envelope from Ms. Quinn heavy in my hands. I broke the seal, my heart pounding. Inside was a note written in Grandpa's steady handwriting. Harper, if you're reading this, your father did exactly what I figured he would. Don't worry about the check. It was never the point, it was just a signal. Behind the painting of the sea cliff in my old study, there's a hidden compartment. You'll find a wooden box there. Your answers start with it, Grandpa. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't been back to the Whitmore estate since I was 23. Grandpa's study was his sanctuary, filled with old maps, worn spy novels, and bits of Navy history. That seacliff painting had hung above the fireplace forever, steady and unchanging. If that box was still there, untouched, it meant Grandpa had planned this from the start. But the bigger question hung over me like a shadow. What answers was he hiding? And why was I the only one he trusted with them? I stared at the note, city lights flickering outside my window. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I'd been erased. I felt called Dot. The next morning, I packed a small bag. Just a few. Clothes, a flashlight, some gloves. Not because I expected trouble, but because the military taught me to trust my gut, and my gut said to be ready. Driving to the Whitmore estate felt like stepping back in time. Every curve in the road brought back a memory. The crunch of the gravel driveway, the creak of the iron gate, the porch that smelled like cinnamon in winter. Inside the house was like a museum of my childhood, books lined up on the shelves exactly where they'd always been. Grandpa's slippers still sat by the study door, waiting for him. It was eerie, like time had stopped. I stepped into the study. The sea cliff painting stared down at me from above the fireplace. I slid it aside, my hand steady. There it was, a small panel, barely noticeable. I pried it open, and inside was a wooden box, dark walnut with brass hinges and a military-grade lock. Of course, Grandpa would make even this feel like a mission. I scanned the room for the key. On his desk was a globe, but twisting it gave me nothing. Then I remembered something he'd told me when I was a kid. If you need to hide something, put it where only someone who knows the stories will look. Stories. I turned to the bookshelf and pulled out The Old Man and the Sea. Tucked inside wasn't a bookmark. It was a brass key. My hands shook as I unlocked the box. Inside were 3 things: a letter, a USB drive, and a photograph. The letter was addressed to me. Harper, I never stopped watching you. They tried to erase you, but you were always my granddaughter. What's in this box will change everything you thought you knew about the Lane family. Use it carefully and watch your back. Some truths come with a price, Grandpa. The USB drive would take time, probably encrypted knowing Grandpa. But the photograph hit me like a punch. It showed my father, Franklin, shaking hands with 2 men I didn't know, standing over a document. The date on the photo, 3 months before they kicked me out. Grandpa's handwriting on the back read, the day they decided who would be sacrificed. I sat back, my breath gone. This wasn't just a family falling apart. This was planned, deliberate, calculated. I tucked the photo, the letter, and the drive into my bag. Whatever came next, this wasn't about patching up old hurts anymore. It was about shining a light on the people who caused them. I turned off the study's lights and locked the door behind me. Tomorrow, I'd start digging. Not in the dirt, but through legacies, lies, and legal records. This time, I wouldn't be the one erased. I thought I was ready. After finding that wooden box and staring at that photograph, I figured I'd steel myself for whatever came next. Nothing could have prepared me for the truth waiting to unravel. That photo was just the starting point. It showed 3 men, my father, a federal judge named Colton Reeves, K., and a banker from the Ashcroft Financial Group locked in a handshake over a deal months before I was cast out of the family. I didn't know the third man at first, not until I ran his face through some old military facial recognition software. Old habits stick with you. His name was Stanley Pierce, a financial strategist who operated in the shadows, helping wealthy families shuffle money to offshore accounts, move assets, and pull quiet power plays. The document they were holding, a corporate restructuring agreement labeled Whitmore Transition Initiative. My breath caught in my throat. My grandfather's legacy hadn't just been chipped away. It had been handed over piece by piece. I hadn't just been cut out of the will. I had been erased from the entire Lane Whitmore empire. I dug deeper. The USB drive was loaded with encrypted files, emails, bank statements, the works. The encryption was no joke, 4 layers deep. But I cracked it. Inside were records of money moving from Grandpa's accounts to shell companies tied to my father. The biggest transfer, $38 million. The exact amount of that burned check. This wasn't theft, was a takeover, cold and calculated. Printed it all out, spread the pages across my apartment floor like a map of betrayal. Redacted dates, fake names, shadow trustees. My father had built a hidden network under the Lane Family Trust, and then he buried me in it. He didn't cut me out to punish me. He did it to tighten his grip on power. For a moment, my hands shook. What I held wasn't just proof of a family betrayal. It was evidence of crimes, money laundering, tax evasion, forgery. Then, buried in an email chain between Pierce and my father, I found a PDF labeled Harper Clause. I opened it and my blood turned to ice. It was a legal amendment drafted when I was 16, tucked into the family bylaws. It allowed them to remove me from the line of succession without a whisper to the public if I strayed from legacy expectations. 3 signatures sealed it: Franklin Lane, Vanessa Whitmore Lane, and Margaret Whitmore Lane, my mother. Her signature, all delicate loops, was the same one I'd seen on school permission slips and birthday cards. But there it was, on the paper that made my exile possible. I didn't cry or yell. A silence wrapped around me so tight it felt like it might choke me. I'd always thought my mother's silence meant she was powerless. Now I saw it for what it was: agreement. Worse, she'd signed off on it long before I ever stepped out of line. I shut my laptop and sat in the dark. Was there anyone who'd ever truly been in my corner? Then I remembered the last piece from the box, a USB-labeled voice. I hadn't touched it yet. I plugged in my headphones, loaded the drive, and hit play. Grandpa's voice came through, crackling but strong. "Harper, if you're hearing this, the fire's already started. Not the check, the fire in your bones, the one I saw in you when you were just a kid. They'll come for you now. Not with guns, but with questions, guilt, and offers dressed up like love. Don't trust them. You were always the true heir. Not because of blood, but because you see things clearly. I left you tools, not a safety net. Proof, not a shield. I knew you'd need to build your own armor to face what's coming. They'll say you're burning everything down, Harper, but you're not. You're refusing to live in a house built on lies. Let it fall, then build something better." The recording stopped. I stared at the ceiling, the words sinking into me. This wasn't about money or a seat at the family table. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about truth, the kind that doesn't ask permission. It kicks the door down. I gathered the documents, drives, and audio files, locking them in a fireproof case. Then I picked up my phone. "Miss Quinn, it's Harper. I'm ready to talk. Not about the will, about the fraud behind it." There was a pause. Then her voice came back, sharp and steady. "Bring everything. Meet me at the cabin, not the office. Too many ears in the city." The next day, I drove to the cabin nestled in the hills above Fairmont Lake, a place that once belonged to a Whitmore cousin long gone. Now it was Miss Quinn's safe haven. Inside, I spread everything out on the table. She read through half the documents, listened to Grandpa's recording twice, then looked at me. "If we go forward," she said, "you're not just fighting a will. You're taking on one of the most connected families in the state. You'll be hated, doubted, threatened. You'll need allies." "I'm done with ghosts," I said. "I'm ready for the living." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, Harper, let's burn the house down." And just like that, the fire began. They say justice is blind, but I've learned it's got sharp ears. It just plays deaf until you make enough noise to be heard. And I was ready to raise my voice. The morning after meeting Miss Quinn at the cabin, filed a petition to challenge the Whitmore will, not just as an heir pushed out, but as a whistleblower tearing the lid off a web of fraud, coercion, and forgery, spun by my own family. It was like lighting a fuse. By noon, my name was all over social media. Headlines screamed, "Fallen soldier turns on her own father. Harper Lane's mental breakdown." Insider scoop, greedy daughter's $1 million meltdown. They hit me with a smear campaign straight out of a dirty playbook. One I'd seen in my military days paint the truth teller as crazy, emotional, out for blood. Make the story about their flaws, not the facts. For a moment, it stung. Old friends I hadn't heard from in years sent messages asking if I was okay, if the headlines were true, if I needed to talk. What I needed wasn't pity. I needed soldiers in my corner, so I called in every favor I had. A buddy from my cybersecurity days ran forensics on the digital files to prove they were real. A retired JAG officer signed on to vouch for my military records as an expert witness. And a journalist I'd once pulled out of harm's way in Kabul agreed to write an exposé, but only when I said go on my terms. Miss Quinn and I burned the midnight oil for days, building a fortress of evidence. Documents, timelines, bank trails, audio logs, expert statements. Character witnesses, all locked and loaded in a file we called Operation Legacy. By day 4, we were ready. The court gave us a hearing set for a week later. That same night, someone broke into my apartment. They didn't take a thing, just tore through drawers, ripped cabinets apart, and slashed my couch to ribbons. A warning, loud and clear. Miss Quinn didn't waste a second. She had me move to a safe house before dawn. "This is bigger than we thought," she said, her voice low. "You're not just up against your father. You're rattling a whole network. He's been shielding." The next day, my mother called. No apology, no concern for my safety, just a flat, "Why are you doing this to us?" Us. That word hit like a stone. Not once did she say my name. Not once did she ask how they got caught. She was still guarding them. "I'm doing this because I was part of us," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And you let them throw me away." She hung up without another word. The week before the hearing was a whirlwind of legal filings, depositions, and late-night strategy sessions. We braced for every trick they'd throw, motions to dismiss, claims of forged evidence, attacks on my teeth. Mental health, even accusations. I doctored the documents. But they didn't see my grandfather's voice coming. In the courtroom, Miss Quinn played his recording. The air went still as his words filled the room, steady and sure, calling me the true heir, urging me to let the lies fall. When it ended, my father's lawyer stood up, smirking. "It's just sentiment. It proves nothing." Miss Quinn didn't blink. She slid a sealed envelope across to the judge. An affidavit from Grandpa's personal assistant, notarized, confirming the recording's purpose and authenticity. Then she laid out the financial records, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, all tracing back to my father. The judge leaned back, silent, taking it all in. It was working. Then I stood up and asked to speak. I looked straight at my father, my brother, my mother, sitting there like a wall of stone. "You didn't just cut me out of a will," I said, my voice clear. "You tried to erase me from a family, from our history. You burned my future and buried my past. But I'm still here, not for revenge, but because the truth deserves a seat at this table too." I sat down. The room stayed quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. The judge called for an emergency review of the will and froze all Lane Whitmore assets on the spot. Outside, cameras flashed, reporters shouted, but I walked through the chaos without a word. Inside, something in me had broken open. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about finding my voice, and I wasn't done using it. The weeks after that courtroom showdown felt like wandering through a battlefield after the guns went quiet. The media storm fizzled out, but the fallout was just starting to spread. My father's assets were locked down, under investigation. My brother got kicked off 3 corporate boards, his name tarnished. My mother. She vanished from the public eye, retreating into that old familiar silence, the kind that had always been her sharpest weapon. Me, I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt empty, as if I'd shouted so long the quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was deafening. That's when it hit me. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the beginning. One morning, I walked by the old Lane Foundation building in Midtown. That glass tower with its marble floors and gleaming silver plaques had always been the family's crown jewel, a monument to their legacy. To me, it was the place where I'd been erased. Standing across the street, I looked up at it and whispered, "No more." 3 weeks later, I launched the Whitmore Initiative, a nonprofit to help women cast out by controlling families, especially those tied to old money dynasties. We provided legal assistance, counseling, and a safe space for them to share their experiences. In just 1 month, over 4,000 individuals reached out to us. A donor from a rival family contributed matching funds to our initial capital. A retired senator committed to speaking at our inaugural summit, and my desk soon became covered with handwritten letters. Some were tear-stained, others vibrated with defiance, all conveying the same message. "Thank you for sharing our story." One letter remained on my desk. "You gave me the words for something I couldn't name. Now I can fight." I was no longer seeking a place at the Lane family table. I was constructing my own. Meanwhile, the investigation into my father intensified. The IRS initiated an audit. The SEC began scrutinizing his offshore accounts. A federal grand jury was quietly assembled. The man who had extinguished my future before a room full of powerful figures was now sweating under oath, with the world watching. But that wasn't what most profoundly affected me. It was an email that caused my heart to stop. A statement from Margaret Whitmore Lane, my mother. She had submitted a sworn affidavit to the court, admitting the Harper Clause was real, confessing she had been coerced into signing it, and most astonishingly, revealing that my grandfather had warned her, months before his death, that my father intended to dismantle the family trust. It didn't negate her betrayal, but for the first time, I witnessed her prioritizing truth over loyalty. A few weeks later, a small package arrived with no return address. Inside was a silver locket I hadn't seen since childhood, the one my mother used to wear. I didn't wear it, but I kept it, a quiet reminder that healing doesn't always arrive with an apology. Sometimes it comes when people acknowledge their actions. 6 months after the hearing, I stood on a stage at the National Women in Law Summit as the keynote speaker. The ballroom was packed, cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and rows of women from diverse backgrounds listened intently. I looked out and declared, There was a time I believed silence was safer than truth, that obeying would keep me close to those I loved. I was mistaken. Love without truth is merely control. Wrapped in pretty ribbons. I paused, then continued. I lost my family. I lost a fortune, but I discovered fire. Not the kind that consumes everything, but the kind that forges something stronger. If you're sitting here wondering if it's worthwhile to speak up, to fight, to depart from a legacy that doesn't acknowledge you, let me tell you, it is. The room erupted in applause, the sound washing over me like a wave. That night, walking home, I passed a newsstand. A magazine headline caught my eye. Harper Lane, the ace who built a new empire. I smiled, not because of the word empire, but because this was no longer about inheriting anything. It was about making a difference. It was just beginning. A year after the final court ruling, the name Harper Lane was no longer just a whisper in hushed rooms. It resonated loudly and clearly in courtrooms, conference halls, and boardrooms across the nation. She was no longer the forgotten daughter. She was a force, a reckoning for those who had been silenced. But Harper understood this wasn't merely about winning in court. It was about constructing something new, something honest, a future rooted in truth. The Whitmore Initiative, her nonprofit, had expanded to 9 states, assisting over 12,000 women who had been cut off, silenced, or betrayed by their own families. They came to her as if she were a beacon in a world that had gone dark, seeking hope, seeking a path forward. One spring morning, a letter arrived. Written in shaky cursive, postmarked from Livingston County Correctional Facility. It was from Stanley Pierce. "I'm not writing to apologize or ask for forgiveness," he wrote. "I'm writing because in the quiet of these cold nights, I keep hearing Mr. Whitmore's voice from that recording. I wonder if you're still carrying the fire he left you. Don't let it go out." Harper didn't respond. But that night, standing in her office beneath her grandfather's portrait, now framed with his etched words, "Truth doesn't knock. It kicks down the door." She lit a candle and whispered, "I'm still keeping the fire, Grandpa." That summer, at the Women in Legacy Reform Summit in New York, Harper launched the AIR Project, a global archive of stories from individuals disinherited from wills, trusts, and inheritances. Not for legal reasons, but due to manipulation, fear, or greed. These stories would be openly shared in the teller's own voices, unfiltered and unafraid. No fake names, no edits, just the raw truth. She knew what she was initiating, a battle that would invite lawsuits, smear campaigns, and threats from families with everything to lose. But fear no longer controlled her. In a private session at the summit, an older woman named Elaine Foster stood up. She had been a co-founder of a major financial firm, her name expunged from every record. "I thought being quiet and doing my part was enough," she said, her voice trembling. "Then I saw you, Harper, on that courtroom live stream, standing tall, even though you were trembling. If you could face your whole family turning on you, what's stopping the rest of us?" The room rose and applauded, the sound like a heartbeat. For the first time in years, Harper allowed herself to cry, not from pain, but from being seen. That winter, Harper was appointed to the Federal Inheritance Reform Committee, the youngest woman and the first with a military background to serve. Standing before Congress, she delivered a speech that resonated across every major news channel. "I'm not here to reclaim what was stolen from me," she declared. "I'm here to ask why we allowed it to be stolen at all. Legacy isn't about money secretly passed down. It's about values openly shared. We don't need another trust fund. We need a revolution of trust." In a small Virginia home, a mother held her daughter close as they watched Harper on TV. "See that woman?" she whispered. She made me believe I might deserve better too." Harper never returned to the house on Fairmont Lake, but one quiet Sunday, she walked the old trail to the dock where she and her grandfather used to sit, their feet swinging over the water, the wind in their hair. The lake remained the same, the air still carrying the scent of memory. But Harper was transformed. She was no longer the girl erased from a will. She was the one crafting a new story for thousands. In her hands was a leather-bound copy of the Air Project anthology. On the first page, a simple dedication to those who were told they were nothing. You were always the fire. She placed the book on the weathered bench, stood for a moment, then walked away. She didn't need to carry it with her. Think fire within? Her was still burning, and now it was illuminating the path for others. If this story resonated with you, join our expanding community. Like this video, subscribe to the Hidden Family Revenge Stories channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you soon. It all began with a phone call I almost sent to voicemail. I was sifting through old files at the Air Project's new office. It's a cozy little spot above a bookstore in downtown Fairmont when my assistant poked her head in. "Harper, someone's on the line for you. Says his name is Silas Dunn." My heart stopped. That name hadn't surfaced in years. Silas was my grandfather's lawyer in his final days. A quiet man who disappeared after the funeral, supposedly to retire in some rainy corner of the Pacific Northwest. "Put him through," I said, my voice steady but my mind racing. When his voice crackled through the line, it was like hearing a ghost. "Miss Lane," he said, rough but warm. "There's something I should have given you a long time ago." 3 days later, a package arrived with no return address, just a wax seal stamped with the old Whitmore family crest. Inside was a wooden box, and tucked within it a note. "You deserve the truth, even if it hurts, S.D.K." Beneath that was another box, small metal and tightly locked. An envelope came with it, and inside a single line. "The code is your grandfather's war ID." I knew that number by heart. I'd memorized it when I was 12. The lock clicked open, and what I found inside hit me like a punch. Documents, photos, letters, and a cassette tape. It wasn't just history. It was a family secret buried for over 40 years. I started with the letters. The first, dated 1969, was addressed to Captain Franklin Whitmore from someone signed only as our chamber's OSS liaison. The words made my stomach churn. "Operation Halberd has been approved. Your family holdings will be transferred as discussed. Fee in return, the file on Project Heron will remain classified. Your cooperation ensures both your legacy and their silence." I couldn't breathe for a second. Operation Halberd, Project Heron. I spent the next week sifting through military archives. Black budget reports, anything I could get my hands on. Most of it was heavily redacted, but bits and pieces coalesced. Project Heron was a post-World War II Operation Domestic Surveillance, murky and wrong. My grandfather had been entangled in it. Willingly or not, Operation Halberd was a financial arrangement, a means for powerful families, old money, industrial giants to shift wealth for immunity or cover-ups. My grandfather wasn't merely a war hero. He'd made choices that cost him a piece of his soul. And now I was heir not just to his fortune, but to his secrets. The cassette tape was the most challenging part. I tracked down an old player, slid it in, and pressed play. Its voice emerged, younger than I remembered, but unmistakable. "If you're hearing this, Harper, someone broke the seal. I left that box behind because I knew one day the cost of what I did would find you." A pause, heavy with regret. "I made choices to keep our name alive, to secure our future for you. But those choices hurt people. Some disappeared." The truth wasn't buried. It was archived. A rustle. Then his voice softened. "You're the best of us. That's why I didn't want you to know. But if you've come this far, you already get it. Can't build truth on shadows. Silence." Then one last plea. "Do what I couldn't. Shine a light, even if it burns." I sat in that office for hours alone, the weight of his words pressing down. I thought of the Air Project, all the families we'd helped, the stories we'd brought into the open, the justice we'd fought for. But now I had to confront a harder truth. Was my own legacy built on righteousness or on silence? The next day, I called a press conference. I stood in front of cameras, reporters, and people who'd been hurt by the same systems my grandfather had once propped up. I told the entire story, not to tear him down, but to start anew, because the fire he'd lit in me wasn't meant to protect the past. It was meant to clear the way for something better. And now I'd let it burn. The aftermath hit like a tidal wave. Within 2 days, 3 major news outlets were delving into the Whitmore legacy, peeling back layers of secrets. Old intelligence. Operatives began speaking, anonymously at first, their stories trickling out. Lawsuits accumulated. And then, out of nowhere, Congress announced a full-blown inquiry. They called it the Heron Files. I was both a witness and the whistleblower. The pressure was relentless. Threats arrived not just directed at me, but at the AIR project, at the people I worked with. But something had shifted. For every attack, a flood of support poured in. Hundreds of messages from strangers cheering me on, sharing their own stories of being silenced. It was as if the world was awakening. Then something else occurred. A woman named June Morris reached out. She was nearing 90, a former records clerk for the Department of Defense. Her voice was soft but steady when she told me she'd handled papers with my grandfather's name on them. She remembered Heron because she'd been instructed to burn the files. But one page, she couldn't let it go. "Don't know why I kept it," she said. "Just had a feeling someone would need it someday." It arrived in a faded manila envelope. Paper inside was yellowed and fragile. One page titled Project Heron Subject Index, Lane Family Variants. Beneath it, a handwritten note. Surveillance, Psyche Evaluations, Intergenerational Control. I stared at it, my heart pounding as if it might break. My grandfather hadn't just been part of it. He'd initiated it, testing, watching, profiling his own family, including me, from the day I was born. For a week, I remained quiet. No press, no speeches, just me and that page, wrestling with what to do. Bury it or release it. The answer became clear in the end. The past only constrains you if you safeguard its secrets. So I spoke. I shared everything. And for the first time since I opened that initial box, I felt truly free. The quiet after I revealed the truth didn't last. The real storm was just beginning to brew. 3 nights after the congressional inquiry was announced, someone attempted to break into my apartment. They took nothing, didn't even touch a drawer. All they left was a post-it note stuck to my fridge. Written in sharp block letters, "Bury it." I moved into a secure apartment the next day, arranged by one of the AIR project's partner groups. Sleep came in short bursts, maybe 3 hours a night. The phone calls kept coming, sometimes just silence, sometimes static, and once a low voice whispering, "You're not done yet." Then an email landed in my inbox. No sender, no subject, just a single line. "There is a layer 2. Attached was a heavily encrypted zip file. I sent it to one of our cybersecurity specialists at the AIR project. When he called me back, his voice was unsteady. "This isn't just about you, Harper," he said. "There are plans to restart Heron. New name, new agency. It's never really stopped. They call it whisper protocols." I needed answers, and I needed people I could trust. That's when Cassandra Voss entered my life. 38, sharp as a blade. She'd been a behavioral analyst for a DC think tank. At our second meeting, she leaned across the table and said, "I was part of Heron too. Not just studied, recruited. I got out when I realized they weren't just watching. They were shaping people, personalities, choices, even relationships." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "More than surveillance." She nodded, her eyes steady. They wanted to control a life's path from cradle to grave. Whisper protocols was the next step. Predictive engineering, not just tracking legacies, but steering them. My stomach turned to ice. We initiated a quiet investigation. It's just me, Cassandra, and a small team we trusted implicitly. What we uncovered shook us to the core. Whisper Protocols was active, funded through Black Ops budgets, hidden behind a fake foundation posing as an educational grant program. Their targets, children. They called them legacy-linked subjects. Some of the names hit too close to home. Kids of donors, officials, other heirs. I couldn't shake the thought. I might have been one of them. We built a dossier, every detail supported by hard evidence. We debated going to the press again, but Cassandra stopped me cold. This time, she said, they won't just drag your name through the mud, they'll make you disappear. We needed leverage, and we found it in Ezra Kane, an ex-intelligence operative, who'd worked on Whisper Protocols before going off the grid. It took weeks to track him down. When we showed him the dossier, he looked from me to Cassandra and asked, "You want this to end?" We nodded. Then stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like an operator. For 3 months, we planned. We leaked bits of the truth in careful waves, each one pointing to a darker secret. A senator's aide got caught in a money laundering scheme. A board member of the fake foundation was exposed through bank records. Then we set the trap. Gave a public televised speech, staring straight into the camera. If Project Heron is still out there, Whisper Protocols exists, we have proof, and we won't stop. Within a day, 2 things happened. The foundation servers were wiped clean, and my car was hacked. I walked away from the crash, but just barely. The message was clear. I'd pushed too far. But it also meant they were scared. That gave me power. So I pushed harder. We handed the full dossier to an independent international tribunal. The hearing started, and the Lane name stopped, meaning legacy. It became a symbol of truth laid bare. The crash left me with a fractured spine. I walk with a cane now. The surgery's reshaping my life. But as I stand here today, testifying before the world, my grandfather's words echo in my mind. Shine a light even if it burns. I did. And it's not just my legacy that's changed. It's the future's. The hall was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Cameras lined the walls, their lenses aimed at me. Senators, foreign delegates, human rights observers, all awaiting my words. I leaned on my cane, took a deep breath, and looked out at them. "My name is Harper Lane," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not here just for me. I'm here for every child who has been watched, shaped, and controlled without ever knowing why." A murmur rippled through the room. Cassandra sat 2 rows back, her eyes fixed on mine. Ezra Kane stood by the exit, arms crossed, his face unreadable. For decades, I continued. The Heron Initiative and its successor, Whisper Protocols, hid behind national security to violate basic human rights. Today, we're pulling back the curtain. We handed over the dossier, hundreds of pages of redacted contracts, personnel lists, audio recordings, and charts mapping children's lives from crib to teenage years. The tribunal members pored over it, firing off questions about names, dates, and motives. One senator cut in, his voice sharp with doubt. "Miss Lane, these are heavy claims. Why should we trust you?" I held his gaze, then pressed play on a recording. My grandfather's voice filled the room. It's weathered but unmistakable. "If anything happens to me, if this goes too far, find Harper. She's the last one I trust." The room went still, the weight of his words sinking in. Overnight, everything changed. Heron Files dominated social media, trending worldwide. Fear accompanied it. Some families denied everything. Others filed lawsuits, and a few simply vanished. Cassandra faced a brutal smear campaign. Ezra Kane was subpoenaed but slipped away before he could testify. We pressed on. 1 whistleblower stepped forward, then 2, then 7. A pattern emerged. A hidden chain of command, not just one foundation, but a sprawling network. The tribunal, Proceeded to trial, I was placed under protective custody. One night, a typed note slid under my door unmarked. "Stop or you won't walk again." I burned it and walked into court the next morning, cane in hand, truth on my side. The trial spanned 3 weeks. Testimonies shook the room, secret footage of early tests, psychological conditioning, even families purposefully torn apart. People in the gallery wept. Judge finally spoke. "This isn't a conspiracy. It's systematic abuse of legacy and power." Then came the ruling. Whisper protocols and all related operations were shut down immediately. Arrest warrants were issued for 6 key figures in the network. A global reparations fund was established for the families they'd harmed. I caught my breath. After all these years, it was done. Now I sit in front of a different camera, not to demolish, but to construct. Cassandra manages an advocacy group for ethical experiments. The AIR project has evolved into a watchdog holding power in check. And me. I guide young women who have been told their stories don't matter, but they do. If you're out there listening, watching, no. This legacy isn't what they hand you. It's what you uncover, what you fight for, what you become. This was my story. Perhaps now it's yours, too. It took years to walk without constantly looking over my shoulder. Longer still to speak without a tremor in my voice. But now, standing on the main stage of the Global Legacy Summit, facing a sea of young faces from every corner of the world, I'm no longer carrying silence. Holding a torch. Cassandra introduced me as a woman who demolished shadows and forged a path in the light. The applause roared like a storm, but I wasn't there to revel in it. I was there to pass on the flame. "We're not just heirs to money or names," I began, my voice steady. "We inherit silence, secrets, and sins, but we also inherit courage and the power to choose." The tribunal's fallout had sent shockwaves globally. In the U.S., a new law prohibited predictive behavioral programs targeting children. In Geneva, the Ethical Legacy Commission was established to keep legacy-driven schemes in check. And back home, the Lane estate, once a fortress of power, was transformed. I converted the West Wing into a retreat for whistleblowers and survivors. The East Wing into a school. We named it the Lantern House, with a simple motto: from silence, light. Twice a week I taught there, not just history or strategy, but how to own your story. One afternoon, a girl named Elsie, only 16, looked up and asked, "Were you ever afraid they'd win?" I smiled. They did for a while, but truth doesn't stay quiet forever. It waits. And when the right voice calls, it comes roaring back. A postcard arrived from Ezra Kane, mailed from Iceland. No return address, just for words. The ghosts are quiet. I tucked it on my bookshelf next to the only photo I have of my grandfather. Him laughing, his hand on my shoulder. I like to think he knew his legacy would crack, burn, and then grow into something new. At the summit, they gave me the final word. I looked straight into the camera. "If they told you your story doesn't matter, tell it anyway. If they erased your name, write it bigger. If they tried to silence you, shout louder. It's the legacy they tried to control. It's yours now." I paused, then added with a small smile, "And if you ever forget that, come find us at Hidden Family Revenge. Stories will remind you." Thank you for walking this road with me. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story. See you in the next chapter.